Hello everybody, and thank you for coming along to the HR committee today. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this afternoon, but if a fire alarm does sound, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and side of this room, so you go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. And also please note that this meeting is being webcast, so can everybody please turn off their mobile phones or switch them to silent. Thank you.
Chair, could I just point out that I don't go to the park. I stand in the refuge area at the top of the stairs, and maybe Councillor Burgess will join me there as well, in the event of a fire alarm.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Tucker, but kindly Councillor Burgess has stepped in, and the same for Councillor Frankham. We've got Councillor Potter stepping in as well. Okay, so obviously it's the first meeting of... Oh, I'm sorry, we've got apologies from Stephen Day as well, Councillor Day. Because it's the first meeting of the year as well, we'll need to appoint a vice chairman. Have I got any nominations? I've got one for Councillor Tucker. Any others? No, so that's good. Okay, so as Councillor Tucker isn't here, can I ask if anybody else would like to nominate someone to step in?
Can I nominate Councillor Burgess?
Yeah, any objections to Councillor Burgess? No? Do you want to come and join me? Okay, so we open the meeting with some urgent matters, and it's the appointment and selection process for the new Director of Borough Services. Can I pass over to Shelley Smith, Head of HR?
Madam Chairman, if I might take the item.
Yes, of course, sorry. Yes.
To the urgent item. Thank you very much. Yes, this is just to confirm to members. An email has gone round this morning from Karen Brimacombe confirming that she's been appointed to the post of Operations Director within Hampshire NHS Hospitals Trust. In the short time that I've known Karen, I've known her to be very effective, very diligent and passionate about the residents of Basingstoke and Deane, and therefore I've congratulated her on her appointment and wish her well for the future, and I'm sure that members will want to do the same. Whilst it's positive news for Karen, it presents us with a problem in that we then need to fill a director vacancy for the council, and what we will need to do is to form a subcommittee of this committee to go through that appointment process. I'll hand over to Shelley Smith, our Head of HR, who will just give members a bit more detail about how it works, if that's all right.
Thank you, Mel. So the Constitution sets out the process for appointing a new director, and the rules state that the appointment of a preferred candidate is made by a subcommittee of HR committee, which must consist of between 4 and 6 members, including at least 1 member of cabinet, and must be politically proportionate. And full council can only approve the recommendation where no well-founded objection against the candidate has been made by any member of cabinet. So this report that you have in front of you as an urgent item asks HR committee to appoint 5 members to the subcommittee, and then the 6th member will be appointed from cabinet. In terms of what would be involved from the subcommittee members, essentially the functions are to support the recruitment process, but throughout that, members of the subcommittee will be supported by both my team and by an executive search company, which we would appoint to assist in terms of helping us to attract the best possible pool of candidates of the highest calibre. and the subcommittee the executive search company supported by myself will do a lot of work in terms of supporting the subcommittee members to actually go about the process of appointing a new director of borough services. So essentially, what will be required of the subcommittee is as follows. First of all, they will meet with the executive search company and agree the recruitment process and selection methods and the advert wording and so on. We would then go out, the executive search company would do the search looking for, as I say, a really good pool of high calibre applicants. And then they would recommend to the subcommittee members a long list of about 12 candidates to be brought in for a first stage interview. The search company would then carry out the long list interviews on behalf of the subcommittee, and they will then come back and recommend a short list of about 6 candidates to bring forward to the final assessment day. Subcommittee will then hopefully agree that short list of, as I say, about 6 candidates, and then finally those 6 or so candidates will be invited in to an assessment day, which would consist of, for example, presentations to panels of members, perhaps panels of stakeholders, perhaps involve staff in that process, psychometric testing and so on. All of that would be facilitated, as I say, by the HR team and the executive search company. And at the end of the first assessment day, the subcommittee would then agree on perhaps 2 or 3 candidates to invite back, hopefully the following day, for final interview. And that final interview will be with members of the subcommittee, who will then make a recommendation for a preferred candidate to full council. And all being well, we would look to recommend a preferred candidate to the full council meeting on the 10th of December. So if there's any other questions about that process, I'm very happy to answer them.
Thank you. I believe Councillor Pearce has a question.
Yeah, my question is twofold. I didn't hear the Chief Executive being mentioned in this process. I'm quite happy that it goes ahead without him, but I suspect, Chair, that he probably won't be so happy. And the second point is just on in terms of the Constitution. One Liberal Democrat member, we've only got one Liberal Democrat member on this group who may have difficulty in getting to any meetings because of his work. Are we restricted to members of the HR committee, or can we extend it?
In terms of your final question, we can use substitutes. So, yeah. And in terms of your first question, absolutely, Mel Barrett will, of course, be involved throughout the process and would be working very closely with the members of the subcommittee to ensure that we select the right candidate, who will, of course, report to him.
Okay, so we say any nominations on who wants to sit on the panel.
If I may, Chair, I'll nominate Councillor Pearce, and I guess Councillor Frankham in her absence. I mean, if there is any issue around attendance in the way that Councillor Pearce has just referred to for Councillor Day, I mean, I'd be happy to offer my own involvement if that met with people's approval. But I mean, you know, Councillor Frankham obviously would be the candidate I nominate first of all, please.
Thank you. Any?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Tucker in her absence.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Joyce Bower. Okay.
Chair, you won't be on it then?
Okay, so then we've got the meetings from the committee held on the 9th of March. Is everybody happy with them? Yeah? All agreed? Okay, and then we move on to paper B, so that's the appointments to the Joint Consultative Committee. Again, are there any nominations from either side? Councillor Potter?
This is my role today, as you understand. Could I nominate Councillor Pearce for this joint consultative committee?
Okay, I'd like to nominate Councillor Joyce Bauer.
Chair, can we do the same? Consult with Councillor Day, and then if he
Yes,
wants to
of
come up
course,
with an
yeah.
alternative.
Okay, so then we move on to paper C, which is the high level restructuring proposal from Mel Barrett. Can I hand over to you?
Thank you very much. The report you've got in front of you today is my proposal for a high-level restructuring of the officer structure so that it's better able to deliver on the Council's priorities. Within your pack, you've got appendices which show full-page versions of the existing structure and the proposed structure, and some additional copies have gone around the table which should help members in terms of going through the paper and not needing to go backwards and forwards. In introducing the paper, I would just set out the following points that I'll cover. Basingstoke and Deane Borough Council is a very good council, employing very good staff, delivering excellent services, and that's reflected in the high levels of resident customer satisfaction that we get and the efficiencies that we're able to achieve, which have resulted in relatively low levels of council tax. There are areas where we do need to improve, however, and in terms of the council's priorities and emerging priorities, there is, I think, a need to do better in terms of the delivery of large, complex projects where I think we haven't done as well as we might have done in the past. And therefore, this proposal seeks to strengthen that area of the organisation so that we're better able to deliver on those priorities whilst maintaining a focus in terms of those day-to-day services that are so important to residents. What I'll do in terms of introducing the paper is to set out my rationale for the proposal in terms of the proposed change, describe to members the process of engagement and consultation that I've gone through. As part of that, I'll invite colleagues from Unison and the Staff Forum to make comments to the committee. I think members of the committee would find that helpful. Then I'd wish to cover off the financial implications and how I would intend to implement the proposals, subject to any comments that this committee may have. In terms of reporting to you, I'm going to take it pretty much page by page. So I'm just sort of turning over now and getting into the introduction. And one of my first reflections on taking up the post is that, of course, this council has a scale of ambition that is far greater than that of a typical district council. And in terms of moving forward to deliver that scale of ambition, it's important that the organisation is sized and scoped in order to be able to deliver on that. And I think there are a number of areas where members have voted resources and we haven't been able to deliver in the pace and the way that we would have wished to. So there is something about the size and the scope of what we are trying to do in terms of the growth agenda, in terms of investing in other areas, that we've got to make sure that we do it well. And that agenda is not just recognised here at the council, but other bodies as well. So regionally, the Local Enterprise Partnership has identified us as a growth town, and government recognise that as well. I think there's also a sense in which how the organisation has grown up recently, it's been fairly organic. So as new projects have come along, we've appointed people to key posts to drive those projects, and they've all ended up tending to report to the Chief Executive. So we've had a structure where we've got a number of significant projects all reporting into the Chief Executive. So if I draw your attention to the existing high-level structure, you'll see from that there are 7 direct reports to the Chief Executive. Now, that can be absolutely fine for those people looking to take forward those projects. They get authority and decision making from the chief executive, and they can then proceed and move forward with their projects. Some of the downsides of that, though, can be that it limits the capacity of the chief executive to be visible across the organisation, to provide that visible, strong leadership that is required. And perhaps there can be a danger that not all areas of the council's business get the same level of rigour and attention in terms of performance management. There is also a danger, and this has been reported to me directly in terms of some of the feedback I've had over the last 5 months, that there can be a sense of some of these large projects proceed without involving other members of staff in other parts of the council. And we all know that the best projects invite in people to comment and shape and improve how those projects are operated. So there's a sense in which that's how things are currently organised. And in moving forward, what I'm seeking to do in terms of this structure is to have very clear lines of accountability in terms of who is doing what, and increasing the amount of capacity within the structure to deliver on that growth agenda and those other key priorities. And when I reference growth, I'm not just talking about growth for its own sake. I'm talking about growth that is well managed and shaped by the council, because part of the challenge we have is there are opportunities out there, and we must have the necessary resources to make sure that that growth is shaped in line with the aspirations of this council. So if I move you to the proposed structure, what I'm seeking to do is to have 3 main directorates dealing with the core lines of activity of the council. In the centre, there is a Directorate of Borough Services dealing with the day-to-day services, as you might expect, quite similar to today, with a significant change that there's a deletion of a post of Resident Services, which I'll come to later, and there is a new Chief Officer introduced, and again I'll come on to that later, in relation to planning. I think a borough with the scale of development in prospect and to be managed as Basingstoke and Deane needs its own Chief Planning Officer, and this was the subject of an independent review which recommended the same, and I'm proposing to put that in place. In terms of growth and development, there is a line under an Executive Director, Borough Development, and that includes things around the town centre, green investment, as well as some of our largest projects. I'll touch on that. And then members will be aware that fairly soon after starting my duties here, I took the view that the Council's Chief Finance Officer was performing at director level and should be on the senior leadership team, and made that change, and this proposal seeks to regularise that. And then there are another 2 direct reports to the Chief Executive. One, we're going to be making some quite large scale and complex decisions, and I'm seeking that the head of law has the capacity to support that process, and I'm seeking to ensure that HR and organisational development gets the focus that it needs. If I take members through the borough development line, and just in terms of, and in a little bit more detail, this role is about making sure that we can deliver on our agenda for the shaping and development of the borough moving forwards in relation to both physical, economic and social development on a sustainable basis. We won't be able to do all of this ourselves. On a number of occasions, we will need to work effectively in partnerships, and therefore this role would have responsibility for external partnerships as well. In terms of the roles reporting directly to this role, the first one I would point out is a new role, and that is the Head of Borough Development and Implementation. So we've been seeking to develop the top of the town and other projects in the town centre for some years. I think we need dedicated resources to drive that project forward, and the responsibility for driving that project forward at head of service level would sit with this post. This post would also drive our work in relation to alternative investment, in relation to green investment. Members have voted resources, but unfortunately we haven't made the progress that we would have liked, and it needs dedicated resources to drive that through, as well as taking forward our work on economic development, inward investment and business retention, and bringing together a coherent whole around that activity. And the existing policy manager for economic and community strategy would report into that role. Secondly, there is the Many Down project, which is absolutely huge, which would report into the role. With Many Down, we're looking at a scheme that potentially has the prospect of having an end development value of some £3 billion. And it's important that we have long-term committed resources to taking that forward. The only change I'm proposing here is to retitle the role from Strategic Project Manager to Project Director. And that fits in with the project organisation structure that we've put in place jointly with County Council, the Hampshire County Council, where they recognise that our post holder is directing that project. I think that just tidies that up. The third major stream of activity relates to Basing View, which is our 1 million square foot business park. Absolutely huge. Lots of it was developed in the 70s and 80s. It's fairly tired now. We're struggling to get occupiers. We need to bring forward new development. It's a massive scheme that's very important for the council, and it's important that we've got a dedicated role that can drive that forward. In taking that forward, we will also have the skills to take forward other large commercial projects. So there will be other projects that come along where we need that skill set to take them forward. So that's the borough development line. In relation to borough services, clearly this role is about making sure that we continue to be effective at delivering those core customer-facing services. In addition to that, though, I think at the director level, there needs to be support and drive to both ensure that we're taking a systematic approach in terms of working through the local plan and the sites that can become available through that to support our housing aspirations. And I think there is also a need, again, at that senior level, to drive our work in refreshing the council's strategic approach to housing and potentially bringing forward a new housing strategy for the council. At head of service level, head of community services remains largely unchanged, but there is a proposal to bring the environmental health team from resident services into community services. The new head of planning role is a new post for the reasons I've set out in terms of the scale and prospect of development in the borough and integrating the forward planning function, planning policy, with the development management function. Currently, those two roles have different line managers, and I want to bring those two together in terms of having a senior chief officer leading our role on planning. In developing the proposals, it was clear that the chief planning officer role could sit either within the development directorate or the service directorate, because clearly it plays into both. But after much discussion, I concluded that it better sat in the service directorate in relation to the volumes of planning applications we deal with, together with the customer service ethos that we were looking to ensure was the case. The other comments I'd make in relation to the services line is that, as at the moment, I would propose that the customer services manager continues to report directly into the director, and that role is responsible for driving our front of house services and increasingly our move to digital, and therefore that's a significant role for us. And I'm proposing that the housing services manager will report directly to the executive director of borough services, and there are some key areas of work to be done there in terms of refreshing the council's housing strategy as well as driving our work in terms of supporting housing supply. In relation to finance and resources, the changes being made here are to give additional capacity in the light of additional responsibilities being given. So there's a proposal to bring together the Exchequer, Management Accounting and Corporate Finance functions under a head of service, under a head of financial services, which would represent growth. There are some posts that remain unchanged. The only thing I'm flagging here in relation to property is at some point executive directors might want to bring forward proposals for my consideration, where we just think about where the skills lie in relation to day-to-day asset management of the properties that we own and in relation to some of the development projects that we're taking forward. So I just flag that that's a possibility. In relation to the commissioning function, I'm proposing that that is moved from the legal and commissioning service area, picked up as a whole and put into finance and resources and reshaped to become a transformation and improvement function. So what that's saying is, of course, the disciplines of the strategic look, benchmarking, working out what's possible, what we want are all valid and are to be retained. But I think there is an additional emphasis in terms of working collaboratively with service areas in terms of moving the proposals that come forward. So those are the three key directorates. In addition to that, 2 further posts would report directly to the Chief Executive. That's the Head of Law and Governance. As I've just said, I would be removing the commissioning function from the legal function. I think some of the decisions that we will have to take moving forward, it's really important that we can ensure that we've got sufficient capacity to provide legal advice on the decisions that we're making. And that there was just a chance that moving forward without that range of functions, there may have been limited capacity to do that. I think in terms of having the head of law providing that legal advice, I think that's paramount for that role, and that's the reason for that change. In relation to other changes within law and governance, legal services, democratic and procurement stay unchanged, but the licensing manager would move to environmental health. I've previously mentioned that in addition to the 3 executive directors and the head of law, they would comprise the senior leadership team and be held accountable for the performance of those areas. And in addition to that, the head of human resources would attend senior leadership team as well to make sure we're taking fully account of the people implications of the things that we're seeking to do. So, before moving to finance, I just want to touch on the HR implications and the process that I followed in terms of engagement and consultation. Rather unusually for a restructuring proposal in the current public sector finance climate, this proposal advocates increasing the resources applied to the staffing structure. The reason it does that is because in order to deliver on the programmes, the priorities that council want to deliver on, I think that's necessary to do that. That hasn't been done lightly, and of course I've had to balance overall costs and benefits, and therefore I am proposing to delete a post, Head of Resident Services. There will also be some tidying up with a strategic project manager role in relation to the town centre. And there are some new posts created in relation to planning, borough services and financial services. Clearly the deletion of a post is not entered into lightly, and we need to ensure that the appropriate support is provided and the council's redundancy handling policy is followed in terms of moving forward on that proposal. In terms of the approach adopted, I held a series of one-to-ones with all my direct reports, both before I started at the council and since joining in April. I then came up with an initial informal proposal that I shared with all heads of service and direct reports, and I did that at the beginning of June. I got some comments back and had some further discussions and refined the proposal before undertaking formal consultation with all those affected, together with Unison and the Staff Forum. And that consultation took place between the 29th of June and the 24th of July. As part of that, 24 formal responses were received, and overwhelmingly these were positive in relation to the intention to strengthen the capacity of the organisation to deliver on that growth agenda, as well as improved organisational clarity and accountability. There were lots of detailed comments that were received that I will be able to pass on to the directors in terms of any subsequent changes they may wish to make. At that point, Madam Chairman, I would propose to pause, and I think it would be appropriate if you invited Unison and the staff room to give their views.
Thank you. Okay, are you, Unison, are you? Okay, so we've got Simon Christian and then Sue Kenyon. Thank you.
Thank you. Not too many things to say, but apart from really thanking Mel for coming along to the staff forum on the 14th of July, Mel, as he's done today, outlined the rationale for the proposal moving forward and answered questions from staff reps at the meeting. At the meeting itself, conversations focused on again, sort of some of the detail around where specific services fell under those individual directorates, as well as sort of if, when and how any subsequent restructure would take place further on down the line. All in all, the staff forum sort of recognised the challenges that the Chief Exec identified and really supported the outline structure moving forwards. And it was generally a very positive sort of conversation. I think the emphasis moving forward was that we don't waste much time starting to implement some of these changes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, it's not working. Very much the same as Simon, so I'm Sue from Unison, very much the same feedback as Simon, that we were involved at an early stage. We believe the proposal was really well thought out and we support it. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Have we got any questions from members at all, or? No? Yep. Oh, okay, sorry.
I'll just quickly do financial implications and then pause for questions. So if I take members to paragraph 10, financial implications. So essentially what this involves is making some adjustments to the salary in relation to the finance function, in terms of moving the current Chief Finance Officer to a director grade, and then clearly there are changes in terms of savings from the deletion of a head of service post and the creation of 3. So that's what you've got in terms of the financial implications. In relation to our overall salaries budget, the proposed increase is affordable within the budget framework, and the reason you've got 2 columns in terms of numbers is that you've got a paper later on in your agenda which talks about a new pay policy in relation to strategic project managers stroke project directors. So I'd pause there and welcome questions.
Thank you. So I've got a question from Councillor Potter, I believe. Or
If I may, Chair, I mean, obviously I've noted it goes without saying what the staff forum and Unison have said in regard to their response to the proposals from the Chief Exec. Far be it from me to rock any boat in this regard, but can I just be clear about a couple of things? Obviously, Mo, you've mentioned the deletion of the Head of Resident Services post, and in regard to the, I think it's paragraph, 5.5 on page 6 of 13 or 13 of 73, there's specific reference really to the housing function. And I just wanted to be clear about this. I mean, I understand, this is my preamble, you know, the emphasis on the high-level projects, the Manidan and Basingview and the sort of sexy projects of that sort. But in regard to day-to-day housing as a function, the sort of stuff that I'm involved with as a local councillor, you know, the small-scale regeneration, all that follows from that. I just want to be clear who is managing what on that, and I'm always a bit wary when we start to talk about matrix management, really. I've never found it to work too effectively. Can you just say a bit more about how that's going to work? I mean, presumably the reference in this paragraph to housing services manager is the housing manager that's listed in the new structure under the red box. That's one on the same post. I guess that is housing services manager, and she or he then will be the primary officer responsible for the day-to-day stuff that I'm starting to talk about. Is that right?
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Yeah, so in relation to resident services and housing services, at the moment resident services comprises planning, housing, environmental health and benefits. And therefore one could say 25% of that head of services time is allocated to those 4 areas. What the proposal seeks to do is, one, to add significant capacity in terms of the Chief Planning Officer role, which obviously adds significant resource. In relation to benefits, it's proposed that that moves to financial services with Exchequer services, which is quite a conventional approach in terms of revenues and benefits in a local authority setting, and environmental health moving to community services. So then the issue then was about how best to support housing services in the context of that 25% in terms of that role. My further reflection was that in terms of housing being a key service area to the borough, not just in terms of the day-to-day issues around homelessness and allocation and so on, which I think, given the challenges and the pressures the existing housing service manager does well and requires support in doing that. But I think there's also a sense in which, given there have been so many changes in relation to housing, there is a need for the council to refresh its strategic approach. And I think there is something about having a process where members get to feed into a refreshed approach in terms of the priorities for housing for the borough. And I reflected on the fact that that would probably need a significant input from a director level role in any event in order to do that. And therefore, that's why we've got this proposal in terms of the director working directly, closely with the housing services manager. In relation to matrix management, one of the things that this proposal seeks to do is to have some clarity of line in terms of performance management in relation to a number of functions, and talks about directors becoming executive directors and therefore having budget accountability for those services as well. That's not to say heads of service aren't accountable, but actually I would hold executive directors for making sure that those outcomes, those outputs and those budgets are delivered as they were described to me. So there is increased accountability there. In relation to the matrix piece, though, on housing, I think there is a sense in which we need to work more collaboratively together in terms of the planning team doing regular engagement with landowners in terms of bits of land that have been identified within the SHLA, in terms of if they haven't come forward, why. With the property team in terms of removing barriers in relation to schemes coming forward for development. And then in terms of the development team within housing, the housing enabling function, working with the Homes and Communities Agency and others in terms of things that can be done to move sites forward. So there is a nature, by its very nature, there is a need for people to collaborate on this agenda.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, there's a lot there. Obviously, it's very difficult in a sense to, I mean, any more than Mel can at the moment, know exactly how this is going to work, but obviously he has the confidence that he's understandably displaying in that regard. Can I just ask a related question on that? Because, and again, I presume this has been nodded through by the various staff representatives, but in regard to the post in question which is going to disappear, under 13.2, paragraph 13.2, which is 10 of 13, 17 of 73, there's reference to the existing redundancy handling policy, and there's a suggested change here, obviously, in regard to where any possible appeal might be heard in this regard. And the words are used: this would enable such an appeal to be decided impartially by an officer I mean, presumably implying, does it, Mel, that it wouldn't be handled impartially by elected members, which I can only read into that as being somewhat worrying, really. But I can personally see no good reason why the established policy should be changed in that regard, and I'd certainly welcome an additional comment on that. I didn't hear any reference from the staff reps on that. Presumably they've said this is okay, which is surprising to me, really, when we have an established policy, really. But could I hear what Mel has to say about that, please?
In terms of managing organisational change, clearly there are choices available to the council. The council has an accepted policy, as Councillor Potter points out. In relation to undertaking large-scale organisational change, in the last two authorities that I've worked for, where I have carried out large-scale organisational change, particularly in relation to some of the areas that we are talking about, the policies adopted by those authorities have incorporated arrangements such that the executive, i.e. the executive director or the chief executive as appropriate, has full authority to see the implementation of the arrangements through, on the basis that the executive are seeking to carry out delivery in accordance with the policy aspirations of members and are accountable for the day-to-day management of the organisation. There may well be in due course an opportunity for this committee to reflect on benchmarking how other local authorities do large-scale organisational change and how that works. Clearly this is not the meeting for that, but I merely reflected on the fact that when I went through the process both informally and formally, and you heard a little bit about this from Simon Christensen just in his comment, that some members of staff did say to me that organisational change processes in the past have felt like they went on too long and were dragged out, and therefore the periods of uncertainty for staff involved went on for a considerable period of time. So of course I'm making no judgment about the fairness of the process in relation to whether it's a member or an officer process. I'll just put that on the record for Councillor Potter. But it's about saying that I would like to have a process that is expedited swiftly. I think we have the benefit in terms of the organisational structure that the Chief Finance Officer is a robust individual, has a particular responsibility in terms of making sure that the council is protected in terms of its finances, and I think that's an appropriate way in order to take it forward. I don't know whether there will be an appeal or not, but it seemed to me, given that I was bringing a report before you today, that I ought to deal with this issue in order that we can swiftly and confidently move forward subject to the comments of this committee.
Just come back. I mean, my only observation, for what it's worth, is that, I mean, in regard to appeal mechanisms like this, I mean, if an analysis is made by all the parties that are in it, that the history of this is that it shows it to be unnecessarily tedious and complicated and can disturb the progress of the sort of reorganisation that various people are alluding to. And it seems to me what there has to be then is a grown-up debate about whether that is the right policy for the future. And what I always resist, I have to say this, is one-off arrangements outside of an agreed policy and procedure, purely because, I mean, there's an argument around a particular post, and this is seemingly what's happening here. So I only flag that up. I mean, it seems to me if it's long overdue that the policy itself should be reviewed for the reasons that I think Mel's alluding to, let that happen. That's the only observation I make, and it sounds as though you're going to be pushing against an open door. If you've got the understanding of the staff reps already, really, and while you're on this high, Mel, you might as well go for it, I should think. But
Okay, thank you. And then we've got questions from Councillor Pearce.
Thank
Thank you, Chair. I just pick up on the first comment that Mel made about council tax. I think it's just very important to remember that actually it's only 7 pence in every pound that this council spends comes from council tax. The rest goes elsewhere, and the rest of our expenditure comes from elsewhere. So records of we haven't increased the council tax, I know that's not a political point, but I'm making a political point, really don't wash with me when we're looking at the overall position. I do have some questions though. Will you actually, on 6.2, Mel, do I mean 6.2? It doesn't matter. Who will actually be head of commissioning, or whatever you call it now, or will it be the same person? Sorry.
In relation to commissioning, there are some interim arrangements in place. The person that leads the commissioning function recently left the organisation after an extended period of illness, so there are some interim arrangements in place. The proposal is that the commissioning function is lifted and shifted, and then reviewed within the finance and resources function. And I think it performs a valuable function, but it can be improved, and I'm sure that staff are looking forward to that process.
Of course, I would much prefer that it wasn't commissioning at all, but there we go. 5.3, a new post. Can you just run us through how you intend to fill that new post?
I would intend to go through a competitive recruitment process. I think that I would envisage an external agency appointment. This is a specialist area. I think the professional challenge for a senior town planner would be one that would be quite attractive for persons out there in the marketplace. And I certainly wouldn't rule out any applications from internal candidates. But I think it's important that we give ourselves the choice in terms of the scale of the challenge that we've got, that we advertise in the appropriate professional press, and there will be people out there who are known to the search agencies and headhunters and so on, and I think we'd want to avail ourselves of those services.
Thank you, Mel. 9.1, under HR process. I'm interested, how long was the temporary post that you're deleting? How long has that been occupied?
So in terms of the role, the role was filled by a consultant under a consultancy contract, and had been doing that work for some 2 years in terms of trying to move forward in terms of the town centre agenda. Once I'd started here at the organisation and spoken to the individual involved, taken advice from HR, it occurred to me that that wasn't offering particularly good value for money for the council, because effectively we were paying on a consultancy day rate for somebody undertaking a long-term project. And in terms of that consultancy day rate, that represented a cost far in excess of a head of service role. So I moved pretty swiftly to put that individual on a fixed-term interim arrangement where we're paying them directly rather than paying consultancy rates on a day rate.
I'm not quite sure I understand that. I do understand, though, that there are other people who are working for us who are also being employed on a consultancy day rate. Are you applying the same policy to, let's say, the role at Basingview?
I think, if I may, I take two questions from that question. Okay. In relation to Basingview, we'll pick up on that in the next report, but I'm happy to say a few words now. I think then there is a broader point about rigour and protecting the council in relation to various challenges that can come about through interim arrangements, and I've certainly experienced challenge from HMRC in the past in relation to interim arrangements. So something I'll be working with the head of HR on is kind of reviewing in the round arrangements where we've got people on consultancy day rates. So that's a broad issue. In relation to Basing View, what I'd be proposing to do, subject to endorsement of the report elsewhere on your agenda, is moving from a consultancy day rate, which is not insignificant, into making a permanent appointment following appropriate process, again, which would save the organisation a significant sum of money.
So you're not getting into IR35? Okay.
Thank you. I think we've got questions from Councillor Boyer.
Mel, having gone through this with the previous council that I was with, are these new posts, albeit a different title, is there any interviews, competency based for people that are moving up into these new posts, or is it just accepted that people would move automatically?
So we've got a couple of different things happening depending on the nature of the posts involved. So, for example, we just talked about the potential new Chief Planning Officer role. So clearly a job specification would be prepared and a person specification, and we would seek to advertise that role and go through a competitive process. And in order to save time, my preference would be we go straight external, but encourage internal applicants to apply at the same time rather than doing a two-stage process. There will be other roles in here where people are essentially doing the job and it's a matter of going through a job matching, job change process. So, for example, if we talk about the Manydown role, for example, there is a person doing that role. I'm seeking to change the job title because I think it will help clarity for everybody, internally and externally, and that will be a relatively straightforward process. In terms of the change management process, clearly those affected may wish to put themselves forward for roles that are available, and in that event, of course, we go through a very prescribed process in terms of looking at the competences we need from the new role and the competences evidenced by the person potentially displaced, and we go through that in a sequential test. So there'll be a number of different approaches to the roles that are being created here, but they'll all be consistent with our policies that we've got adopted.
Can I just come back? One role that I was very pleased to see is the head of planning, and we went through a similar thing down at Arran District Council. The one thing there, we waited an awful long time for this person to start. Are you setting any time frame when you want that post filled? Because I think with all that's going on, it is really something that we need to get going on.
There is clearly a capacity issue that I have identified in terms of putting that resource in. I think it's important for me to say that the existing development management manager and the existing policy manager on planning are both doing an excellent job. So that there is no criticism of them in this role. The engagement I've had with them, and I think they've accepted, is we need additional capacity, and we need capacity from someone who is professionally qualified in town planning. That's the issue for us. I think what I'd be seeking to do, subject to HR Committee's comments, is to see whether I could negotiate, subject to the choice of agency that is selected for the director role, if they have some exposure and experience in the town planning function. It may well be that we can, negotiate a fairly competitive deal and use them as well. But if that doesn't work, we'll use the appropriate people to get us to the right audience in terms of the planning function. No, all I'd like to do is take on board comments, wrap this up as soon as possible, and then get on with the process, because I think the sooner we have somebody, the better. But I don't think it's a role, unless something very strange happens at the local plan process, where I propose to get an interim in, because I think people are working extremely hard and know their briefs, And I think somebody else coming in to be permanent, that's one thing. Somebody else coming in who might only be here for 6 or 8 weeks and going away again, I'm not sure that'd help us, but I think that'd be my approach.
Yes, we tried that and it didn't work. We had to wait 6 months because someone had a commitment that they couldn't come. But I think it's really important that, you know, having one person at the head, it sorts out, it brings together both sides, both from the planning issues of day to day and the local plan and things coming up. Yeah, thank you.
I think Councillor Pearce has got a few more questions as well.
Not a few more, just you see, whenever somebody talks, something else comes into my mind, I'm afraid. With your executive director leaving, I'm slightly concerned it appears to be less than 3 months' notice. My understanding is that it should be the beginning of December, and I understand that that person's leaving in November, which worsens the position that Councillor Bowyer has just raised.
The date that's been indicated to me, and the head of HR may wish to come in, was thank you, that they in fact resigned on the 19th of August, and therefore the 3 months takes you to the 22nd of November.
Okay, have we got any other questions at all? Now if we move to Councillor Bird.
Thank you. I'd like to move the recommendation. 2.1.1 says that we note the contents of the report and makes any comments the Chief Executive for his consideration. Well, I'm sure Meryl's been scribbling away while we've been debating. And 2.1.2, we agree that any appeal against a decision confirming redundancy for a head of service is heard by Section 151 officer. I so move.
Okay, all agreed?
Personally not agreed to the Section 151 officer. I think there's no need for it, as Councillor Potter raised. So can we take this in 2 halves, please? I don't want to vote against the report, but I do want to vote against that, and since it was raised separately.
Is that So have you got any comments on that then, Councillor Pearce, or?
Well, I mean, I thought I'd made my point. I, like Councillor Potter, don't think it's equitable for the Section 151 officer to hear appeals against redundancy. I think the process is a good one. You know, it's in place, and outwardly, I would have thought it gives a much better indication of lack of bias, particularly if it was across the piece. So I don't see any reason why, since the redundancy level is likely to be very, very low anyway, it's not as though we're putting hundreds of people on notice of redundancy or potential redundancy. I would have thought we should leave that as it is. But I'm not, personally not against, I don't think we are against the report as a whole, but I need to make that point. So you can either, well, you can deal with it how you like, but I've made the point that I don't think it's right.
Okay, we've noted that and we'll look into it. Okay, so the first recommendation is we support the report, but the second part is we've got the query over the handling of the redundancy. Okay, are we all agreed on that? Okay, thank you. Right, let's move on to the next. Okay, so moving on to paper D is the pay structure proposal review. and this includes the introduction of grade 14. Sorry, going back to paper C now. So if we vote on section 2.1.2, so Councillor Pearce's point of how the redundancy will be handled by officers or members, can we vote that we're all in agreement of the proposal? So who's supportive?
Could I help? I mean, as I raised it, if I may. I mean, clearly, I think for you to know, I mean, our reservations about the amendment to an existing established procedure, which I think both I and Councillor Pearce have argued we don't see being necessary in the circumstances. I mean, just to put it on record for Mel's benefit, I know he wants something to happen quickly, and I think he's heard comments from others saying perhaps it has been protracted in the past. I'm pretty certain were there to be an appeal in this circumstance, we're talking about a one-off anyway, the elected members could move as quickly as you wanted in regard to an expeditious hearing of any appeal. I don't see it being delayed in any way, and I don't think there's any major principle involved in regard to the logic for the redundancy and the background to any appeal that might be heard. So, I mean, we can do no more at this juncture. I mean, as Councillor Pearce has said, we're not seeking to undermine the thrust of this report, but to ask for our reservations about that variation on a procedure to be noted and our concern noted. If that's done, I think that's sufficient.
Thank you. So they've been noted. Okay, so now we move to the vote. So who's in support of Councillor Pearce's comments? Can you raise your hands, please? Yeah. Okay, and then who objects? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so it goes forward as per the recommendation. Okay, so now, sorry, back to paper D on the pay structure proposal, and as I commented on it before, the introduction of the new grade 14. So can I pass over to Mal to comment on it?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If I introduce, and then I'll hand over to Shella as our head of HR. So clearly this follows on from the previous report in that essentially it seeks to go into a little bit more detail about the nature of some of the very large-scale programmes and projects that the Council is seeking to take forward. There has been an opportunity to undertake some benchmarking, and one of the things that I've reflected on in terms of my time that I've been here is that there have been a number of key areas where we've had interim or people on weekly notice periods undertaking key projects. And clearly it's important that we've got permanent staff committed to the long-term success of the council and the borough in terms of taking some of these projects forward. And quite often what one looks for is a balance of in-house resources where you've got that expertise to manage sometimes where you do need external consultants, but to manage them well because we've got that expertise in-house. So that's the context here. Reference was made to Basing View. Clearly there's a day rate indicated in the report, and one can see that that is very significant. And clearly what I'd be seeking to do if this report is supported is to try and move to permanent arrangements in relation to some of those major projects. But if I can hand over to Shella.
Yeah, just to elaborate a little further on the benchmarking exercise which was carried out, firstly in respect of the strategic project manager role. That benchmarking showed that the current rate of pay offered by the council is significantly below the market rate for comparable posts in accordance with the council's pay policy statement, and the aspiration within that to be in the upper quartile in terms of pay benchmarking. That could present a significant risk to the council if the current post holder in the Manydown strategic project manager role were to leave the council, because we could face significant difficulties in attracting suitably qualified candidates to that role if we were ever in that position. In addition, if we go out to employ directly a strategic project manager to cover the Basing View role, we may well be in a similar situation there in terms of the pay not being sufficient to attract suitably qualified candidates. So what this report proposes is to introduce a new grade 14 in between the grade 13 and the current director level post. And essentially what we're recommending here is that the current director incremental pay points become the pay points within the new grade 14. If that proposal is agreed, then consequentially an amendment would be needed to the director grade to maintain an appropriate pay gap between the top of grade 14 and the director grade, because it is recognised that the director role is carries larger responsibility than the project director stroke project strategic project manager role, and therefore should be paid at a higher rate in accordance with equal pay legislation. So in addition, there would be an added benefit, as well as we will now be seeking to appoint a new director of borough services. If we're able to go out to the market with that more attractive salary package, hopefully that would mean that we would be able to support attraction of really well qualified and high calibre applicants to that role. There would in turn be required another amendment to the lowest incremental points within the chief executive grade, but just to stress the point that this element of the proposal would have no financial impact at present, as explained within the report. So hopefully that helps to explain the proposals in a bit more detail, but very happy to answer questions if that would help.
Got a question from Councillor Bauer.
It's not really a question, it's just I'm pleased that you have raised the bar, because I think we're a very important council in the South East and we need to attract the right calibre of people. And I think sometimes pay is a barrier to getting some of the people that we really would want to attract in the future. So I welcome the report.
Councillor Potter.
I mean, mine's not a question either, it's an observation. I mean, these sort of reports are always the most difficult to write, I have to tell you. I mean, I remember when I used to be a manager a long time ago, a senior manager having to write something similar about trying to provide the words for the worth of an individual who I didn't want to lose from the organisation, and just trying to get the words right in balance is very difficult, but and I respect the way this has been written. I'm particularly pleased to hear what Shella had to say about the benchmarking process, because if that is objective and it does make the comparisons in terms of the market that exists in this regard, then it's good to know that, really, and I think it can be justified on that basis. I mean, I note also that Unison's been consulted and confirmed its understanding, and that obviously means that staff who are currently held to a 1% increase are understanding of the need for other people to get fairly significant increases within the organisation. Well, so be it, really. Clearly I'm well aware of the importance of the individuals concerned. Normally speaking, you know, my position is I expect grading structures to be designed around the duties and responsibilities of posts. You know, that's the way that we do it. But in these circumstances, there is very good reason, it seems to me, for this to be introduced, and perhaps long overdue, in the way that I think Mel's report says, and Shell has indicated, that this is a deficiency within the sort of top quartile areas. So I don't have anything more to say beyond that, Chair.
Thank you. Have you got any other comments or questions? No? Okay, so can we go through with the recommendation to endorse the proposal and to recommend to full council? Agreed? Okay, brilliant, thank you. Okay, if bit of a change in the agenda, if we move on to paper G. Just while we're waiting for the officer. So yes. So item 9. So we're just waiting for the officer. Oh, here he is. Okay, so back to paper E. So we've got Paul Mahoney here, and he's going to present on the employment termination costs. Thank you.
Okay, hi. This is a report on the 2014-15 termination costs. It's really for information, hopefully a straightforward report. Pleased to say that costs are actually down on previous years. There is a confidential appendix attached to this report for information. That's it, so thanks.
Any questions or comments at all? No? Councillor Potter? No? Okay. Okay, so this is all noted then.
The only thing sorry. It says settlement payment. Is that a dispute or a...
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Potter. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, in this particular case, the individual, there was a restructuring going on within the department. The individual concerned, and a potential redundancy situation. The individual concerned asked the council if we would consider allowing them to leave their employment early in advance of the restructuring proposal actually coming to fruition. We agreed to that on the basis that it was mutually beneficial for both parties because it allowed the individual to reach their aspiration of leaving early, but actually in terms of the redundancy payment that we would have paid, in the very likely event that that had gone ahead, it would have been double the amount within this settlement agreement. And so it was agreed on the basis, in this particular case, as being financially beneficial and mutually agreeable to both sides.
That was a compromise agreement then, was it?
Okay, so this is all noted. Okay.
Noted.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So if we move to item 11 now, we're just waiting for the officer for paper F. So if we go to paper G.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the HR Annual Review and Operational Management Issues report. And this is a report that we provide to you every 6 months to bring you up to date with key performance and management information for the Council's workforce. And this report focuses on the whole of the last financial year, 2014-15. We have also included data for the first quarter of the current financial year, just to give you a flavour of how the trends in terms of performance reported in this report are going at that early stage. So the report is one of the key mechanisms that we use to update you on progress against the 5 strands of our people strategy. And it's hoped that this helps to reassure members that effective HR strategies and systems are in place to effectively manage the Council's workforce, mainly so that our staff continue to deliver excellent services to the residents of the borough. A particular focus of this report over the years has been sickness absence rates at the Council, and you'll see that those are reported within the body of the report. Again, this presents a very positive picture for 2014-15, with absence rates being at their lowest levels ever at the Council, and in fact the Council performing better in this regard than both the public and the private sector averages. The last Joint Consultative Committee meeting also featured a detailed discussion about sickness absence and what more the Council could do to try and improve health and well-being, and so increase those attendance levels further if possible. Members will also see that a key focus in 2014-15 has been on improving levels of well-being and staff engagement through, for example, the development of our new employer brand and values, which we'll use in a variety of ways, particularly around attracting great candidates to come and work for the council. And also the work of the Wellbeing Group, and within the report there's further detail provided about what that group has been up to. That work continues into the current year. I just wanted to bring your attention to two very small amendments within the report, if I may please, on page 71 of 73. And apologies for this, just a slight amendment to the figures in terms of the equalities monitoring information for job applicants. Under the gender equality strand, the figure for no value should not be 19. Apologies, there's a missing decimal point there. It should be 1.3 in fact. And then also in the do you consider yourself disabled strand, the figure for no value should be 26.7. And just to clarify, no value means that the individual has declined or decided not to answer that question for some reason. They've chosen not to reveal what their equality status is in that regard. So if you have any questions, members, I'm very happy to take them.
Councillor Potter?
Sorry, I beg your pardon, Chair. I've just got one question, if I may. I mean, I'm very pleased to hear Shelley's report, especially in regard to sickness absence figures having improved so much. I just wish Councillor John Leake was still on the committee to hear this, really. But no matter that, and I'm sure some of this is due to the regular supply of bananas with all that potassium. But on the paragraph 8.5, is that figure right? And if it is, I didn't understand it quite in the tables that I've read. There's been a 61% increase in absence due to muscular, skeletal problems. How do we say that properly? I'm sure. Oh, thank you very much. Okay. Is that 61% figure right, Shelley? And how's that calculated?
Yes, it is correct. It's a 61% increase against the figures for the previous year, 2013-14. So it's something that we've picked up on as a potential issue, and we're looking into the reasons for that increase in more detail. So, for example, in some cases, it's due to age-related factors. So individuals have had to have operations, for example, for knees and that sort of thing. So in some cases, it's age-related, but that isn't the full story. Obviously, our operations team also have quite a manual role, and so some of the absences within there. So it's something that we're keeping an eye on, in particular to look at what proactive measures we can put in place to try and address those particular issues. And so examples would be the on-site clinical massage service that we offer to staff, which staff fund, but that they can access very easily because it's actually at the council's workplace.
Chair, just on that then, I mean, in terms of, obviously, thank you, Shelley, for that. In terms of the specific figures that we're talking about that give rise to the 61% increase from year to year, what are the absolute figures that we're comparing there? And I'm sorry I haven't found it, as I say, in the tables. What numbers of employees are we talking about?
So if you look on page 68 of 73, you can see these are the top 10 reasons for absence in 2013-14. And musculoskeletal problems is quite far down the list. It was the 8th reason for absence in 2013-14. It was 242 days, and there were 15 individuals that were absent for that reason. If you turn to page 67, you'll see the table for 2014-15. And this year, musculoskeletal problems is the second highest reason for absence, with 390 days attributed to 17 individuals.
No, I'm confused, Chair Shelley. You tabled 7B, you've got back problems and you've got musculoskeletal problems. I think they're the same. And then you've got injury fracture, and I think that's a musculoskeletal problem. But that said, on 7C, you've only got musculoskeletal, there aren't any back problems. So are they so low that they didn't warrant reporting? Okay.
Yes, that's correct. So we only report the top 10 reasons that are most frequent. So in 2014-15, back problems, in 2013-14, back problems wasn't in the top 10.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very concerned. At rank 1, we know, don't we, that this is one of the biggest causes of absence in industry, along with musculoskeletal problems. And I'm concerned that the average length of time has gone up so significantly. I'm also concerned that the number of staff seems to have been roughly the same, 26 to 28. And I'm just interested to know what it is we're doing with that, and is the average indicative, or is it 2 or 3 people with lots and half a dozen with, you know what I'm saying. But nevertheless, over 1,000 days lost in comparison with every other condition. So it must be a priority if you're going to get your figures down. So what are we going to do about that?
Just to clarify that the incidence of absence for stress, anxiety, depression actually reduced from 2013-14, where it was 28 individuals with an average length of absence of 39 days. And then in 2014-15, the numbers had reduced to 26 with an average length of absence for 25.9 days. So the numbers of people have decreased slightly, but the length of their absence has reduced. So the way that we're achieving that is, well, there's a number of ways actually. So the first thing is that we offer free face-to-face counselling for staff through Basingstoke through Basingstoke Counselling Service, and that's something that staff can access without having to go through their line manager, which perhaps could be an issue for them, and that can be accessed whether it's home or work-related reasons for the stress absence, because from the council's perspective they're not at work potentially, or they could go off work, and so that's money well spent if we can access that counselling for them very quickly. Something else that we have access to is an employee assistance programme where there is face-to-face counselling provided to all staff through our healthcare cash plan scheme. But in fact, that's available to staff even if they are not a member of the healthcare cash plan scheme. So they or any member of their household can actually use that over the telephone counselling service 24 hours, 7 days a week. We've also run some training sessions for managers and for staff, and part of our management development programme, the recent module has been on resilient management, so how to make yourself as a manager more resilient, how to recognise signs of stress within your staff, and how to ensure that your employees are as resilient as they can be. And we also ran some bespoke sessions through our occupational health provider, the Robins Institute, again aimed at managers, helping them to carry out, for example, stress risk assessments, identify the causes of stress, take action early in order to address that. I guess the other ways that we do it as well is to try and ensure that staff are feel well and healthy when at work, and so all the engagement work that we're doing around, for example, the wellbeing group work, building the engagement through the employer brand and values and so on, that all relates as well to hopefully making this a good workplace that people want to come to work.
Thank you. I don't feel very good about this, but I mean, great, but we've almost had as many days so far this year as we had last year, and almost the same number of individuals. Would that be because they're the same people and they just haven't been cured, if you see what I mean?
Yes, in some cases, but not in all. And again, that is something that we are working very closely with the managers concerned. obviously I can't go into details, but I've looked at the detail behind these figures, and we know the reasons for this absence. In some cases it's work related, in some cases it's domestic issues, bereavement, that sort of a whole range of different reasons. And in some cases it's difficult to distinguish between there's both elements impacting on the individual and causing them to be absent from work, unfortunately. So we are working very closely with the individuals and the managers concerned to try and do everything that we can to support those individuals to come back to work as quickly as possible. And in many cases that involves support through our occupational health provider as well. But yes, I agree, that is a trend that we're keeping a very close eye on.
Okay, any other comments, questions? So is it all agreed that the report's been noted? Yeah. Okay. If we move back to paper F. Okay. So this is the Corporate Health, Safety and Wellbeing Report, and we've got Paul Beaumont here to present. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Fellow committee members and colleagues, the report that I present to this committee is an annual report which details the current health and safety standard at the Council and the progress we've made in the last 12 months. The approach that we take here is a very sensible management approach. It's built on good, clear policy, robust risk assessments and training the workforce. We have in place some robust systems and procedures to prevent serious injury and ill health, whether the work activities are performed either in-house by our own employees or indeed by our externally by our contractors. We consider ourselves with full engagement of our staff and managers to provide a safe working environment for all, and the public events that we provide here, we consider that to be a good example of this working well. Inside the report in front of you, I've explained the Council's safety progress, have produced some statistical data of incidents that have occurred here. Most are minor. We do learn from the incidents reported in the last 12 months. We've actually implemented an action plan to include manager training to challenge employee non-compliances, and we've also provided bite-sized training to employees so we can alert them of some of the careless behaviours that can result in personal injuries and ill health. In the closing stage of the report, I've shown our new and projected action plan, our clear mission for 2015-2016, and that's supported by both the Council safety committees and the Unison involvement as well. I represent these committees today and ask this committee to note the contents of the report and to work alongside us all to make this journey of continuous improvement at Basingstoke and Deane. I'm happy, Chair, to take questions and or comments on the work that we've proceeded with.
Any comments? Councillor Potter.
My last question, I think, today. I was just intrigued, really. I don't know whether it is appropriate for anything to be said. I guess it is because of the potential seriousness of a notifiable accident. But in terms of paragraph 7.1, on page 5 of 1144 of 73, there's reference to two RIDDOR injury reports to the HSE, which obviously are the more serious, I think, of the notifiable incidents. Is there anything that can be said to us about those? I mean, they're matters that have been dealt with, obviously. They are the more serious level of reported incidents, aren't there? Is there any additional comment that can be made?
Whilst I won't go into any detail of a personal nature, the two incidents referred to was a divot or a pothole in a grassed area where one of our guys was actually cutting a hedge and his foot fell into the hole. He was off work for more than 10 days, so that's a RIDDOR report. In the scheme of things, it's not a serious incident, but it's one that incapacitated from him continuing to come to work. And the other was actually an employee getting into a motor vehicle and sprained her knee. And that, again, took quite a long term of absence. It's more the joint and the tendons to the knee itself. But in terms of its serious ranking and risk profile, very, very low.
I'd just, back on the same paragraph, if you wouldn't mind. it's noticeable in 2014 the instance of slips and trips had escalated due to snow and ice during the winter months. I thought that the previous winter was worse than this last one, but perhaps I'm wrong.
In terms of stats, the last period, of course, was the flood, which did increase some of our incidents. But no, December and January we had quite in fact 5 from memory, isolated patches of ice, 2 of which were on our own car park here at Eastlands.
Just for point of accuracy, the floods were not in 2014-15, they were just before that.
Thank you. Any other comments? So we all agreed that the paper's been noted and that we will continue to support and promote health, safety and wellbeing improvement to all the council officers and others affected. Brilliant, thank you. So can we just quickly go back to the subcommittee on the recruitment process? It seems that we've got 6 people on there rather than the 5. Are we happy to nominate Councillor Day in his absence?
Chair, I'm perfectly happy. I thought somebody was going to contact him to see whether that was a possibility. I don't know where you've got the 6 from. I'm now confused. Congratulations.
Okay.
I'll try and shed some light on this one. There's 6 people, 1 being the cabinet member. So there's 5 members of this committee that will be required. We've got Councillor Pearce, Councillor Jane Frankham, Councillor Tucker, and potentially Councillor Day, because to be politically proportionate, we will need a Liberal Democrat, be it either Councillor Day or Councillor Dunlop as his substitute. So we can nominate one in their absence and they can decide among themselves who wants to substitute on, if that's the case. Where there is some confusion is we've got Councillor Bowyer nominated, so we've got an extra Conservative, so it needs to be either Councillor Bowyer or Councillor Edwards, and as the chair it should be Councillor Edwards. Have I clarified that? Yeah, so just to be clear on what we need to do, it's just to nominate Councillor Day in his absence and to nominate Councillor Edwards rather than Councillor Bowyer. Okay?
I'm sure you're right. I thought the chair was on anyway, and it was that in addition, it was the appointees were in addition to the chair.
Yeah, but we can only have 6, so it's got to be 3 Conservatives, including a cabinet member. So there can only be 2, so it would be Councillor Tucker and Councillor Edwards.
Okay. So we've got all agrees Councillor Days. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yep, Councillor Boyer.
I would like to go on that committee. Having worked in HR for the last nearly 40 years, I feel I've got a lot of skills that could bring to it. But, you know, if that's the way it works, you know, but I would have thought you'd have looked at what people could bring to the party. That's all I will say.
Can I also add that if Councillor Frankham is overwhelmed with work, that we'd seek a substitute to that, and that would be Councillor Potter. But I'm not sure that that's registered because it came back again.
Can I propose that we have Councillor Boyer going on the committee and taking Councillor Tucker off? Yeah. Okay. Okay, the meeting's now closed. Thank you.